Welcome to Life Burst. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Matt. And today, from brokenness to bikie. Stick around.
Yes, welcome to Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. And today we are chatting with Steve. So thank you, Steve, for joining us today. And we're going to start with the first question that we ask all of our guests is, where did life start out for you?
How you going? I'm an Adelaide Hills boy. So I was born in a little country town called Mount Torrens. Had a few hundred people and not the most exciting place on earth, but it was there, and this is the community that we grew up in. And I actually started out life in a family which had a level of commitment to church. It was a Lutheran church. I went along to the primary school there as well, and my entire take on what was happening was not entirely engaging for me. I guess I tried to. I don't know what that really means. So as a little kid, I went to the primary school, and I remember the teacher taking us all through the book of or parts of the Bible. It was definitely Exodus, probably a children's Bible, you know. And it was really, what it was doing was stirring something in me. So she was talking about Moses and the way God spoke to him out of a burning bush, the plagues that came on Egypt, all the different stuff. And something in me was like, if God is real, if God is like that, I really would like to know him. I'd like to, you know, like if he's personal, if he's real. But it was a difficult thing for me because nothing appeared to work like that for me, or nothing appeared to work like that around it. It was just like religion and sort of some sort of stories about God and a lot of rules and 10 Commandments, and I just couldn't engage any of them very well at all.
So who was in your family?
Well, obviously I got two parents, mum and dad. I've got an older sister, Margie. Christine's an older sister, and in between them was David. I was born a lot younger than the rest. I sort of came along about 7 years after Christine. Those three were all within 4 years of each other, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember later in life they'd talk about people, and they were so surprised that I knew nothing about. Maybe they just thought that I absorbed everything as a little kid when I didn't, you know. So I sort of was quite, in some ways, I felt really dislocated from the family, or really, you know, not really engaging. So the whole thing of family, God, everything like that didn't really engage for me very well at all.
So what kind of a child were you then, growing up in that environment? I imagine you were quite the little angel.
I was always distracted.
Right.
Continually distracted. In the school, in the classroom, I found myself unable to concentrate. Reading was one of my pet hates, so I couldn't handle it. I invented a vow that I used when I wrote, which represented all five of them. I wrote really messy. And this sort of didn't even surface until I was in the Philippines in 1996, setting up a crusade. And I had a laptop, and I'm trying to put in all these information and fax it all back into Malaysia. And suddenly I realised I can't spell.
Right.
I've got to use a keyboard, and I can't do anything with it.
Oh, no.
So you're inventive.
Yeah.
You may do.
Yeah, so basically myself and my teachers,
Yeah.
we had an understanding of each other that we just hated each other, you know.
Yep.
I had a big Huntsman spider in my desk, and it was those old desks where they had the oil ink hole, you know, like the ink hole in the top, and the hinged lid that you put all your books in there. Now, obviously, I'm a lot younger than that, but the desks were that old. And so I kept this huntsman spider in there, and I put something over the inkwell holder, hide him in there. And when I pulled it off, he'd come bursting out of the hole, and there'd be girls running and screaming, and I'd get it. Oh, it was great, you know. And then the teacher murdered my spider, which was horrific. I was just, I had to deal with that as a little kid.
Wow. Wow.
It was only a small primary school. There's about 26 kids when I started. It's actually wound up and it's finished now. There's no school there at all. And I was just the naughtiest kid in the school. So probably the most distracted and the most unengaging. So then I get through to high school over at Birdwood, and I found myself being in the trouble as well continually. So it wasn't just a small group, it was the larger picture as well that the trouble sort of followed with. So it was an interesting environment. I was always looking for attention. I thrived on negative attention. That seemed to be what I got the most. So in the community, I found that if someone did something, if any of my mates did something, I had to take it to a further level and somehow push the boundaries to just be able to get the biggest laugh or the biggest, whatever it was that came out of it.
So there'd be a lot of people in those schools and communities that still remember your name for all the wrong reasons.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
I have a friend of mine who lives in Tasmania, Zoe Hosey, but for a while she was in Queensland on staff as a teacher in a school at Springfield, a private school, and they were looking for people to come in and teach kids different skills, and she suggested me on the mechanical stuff, and she mentioned my name to the principal, and he said, "I hope it's not the same Steve Schiller that I know." And he was actually my primary school school principal.
Wow.
At one stage. And Zoe's recollection is the blood drained out of his face. And he said, "I never called any of my kids Stephen."
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So where did this rebellion come from, do you think, Steve?
Oh, I got no idea. I don't know if it was rebellion or just mischief. I don't know. I didn't seem to engage well with my dad. Dad was a lot older than me.
Mm-hmm.
He was 54 when I was born. And he was worn out and tired all the time. And I guess in some ways I was a bit jealous of other people's dads, because they would do stuff like kick a footy or do things. And that sort of thing just never happened around me with my dad. I don't really understand it fully, but as a kid, when he walked in the room, I'd walk out of the room. I don't know why that happened. Pretty sad for him, really, in many ways, not just, I'm not just looking at myself, but, the way it would have affected him, I'm sure would have been pretty awkward. And that father role is your primary role on how you relate to God. So I guess as a young fella, it was almost like, having heard about God in the book of Exodus at primary school. It's like now he's got too old to have any fun anymore. I somehow related that in, and if God does exist, he doesn't do anything anymore like he used to. So to me, the whole package was very dismissible of faith and of Christianity. Although I had this little spark of hunger as a kid, I was told that Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and God were all real. And then over time, I threw the entire Trinity out, which was Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, and God.
Yeah. Well, we will come back and hear more of Steve's story straight after this on Life Burst with Matt and Sarah.
This is Life Burst with Sarah and Matt. We are chatting to Steve, and Steve has spoken of his childhood. But as you finished high school, Steve, what were your hopes? What did you feel like you'd fall into as your future?
Oh, wow. Okay, I loved anything I could throw a spanner at. I hated school. I hated homework, but I used to go to the rubbish dump in Mount Torrens, and the old boy used to keep all the old motorcycles and lawnmowers and everything there, and I would just hang around, and he'd collect them all up for me, and Mum would come down several hours later and with the ute, and we'd load her up, and I'd take them home and fiddle around and get things going, and I'd be always had something for sale. So by the time I was 16, I bought an 8-year-old car with cash, which was amazing. I'd sort of earned all this money, learned how to do this, and I had a brother-in-law that was a mechanic, and so I had someone to bounce everything off of and pick everything up from. So I loved that. So I just wanted to be a mechanic. So I did work experience at a couple of places, and I got offered 2 apprenticeships within 4 hours, which was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And I had to make a choice between Hissy Motors over at Birdwood and Jarrett Nissan up at Bridgewater, and I ended up at Bridgewater. So I got into that, but I still just gravitated to all the nonsense with the wrong people all the time, and was always causing trouble and in trouble and drinking too much and driving too fast and swearing too much, and just everything was always issue after issue. Now, growing up, my mum used to say that it wasn't really me, it was just the company I kept, because mothers are beautiful at protecting their chicks. They they gather their little chicks under their wings, and they think nothing rough of them. But mum would just say that, and I got myself in quite a bit of trouble, and I made this decision, this idea, this thought, that if I hung around better people, it would fix everything up. So I went along to the Lutheran youth group in Spring Head, which is the church that I'd sort of grown up going to, thinking if I just get rid of all my bad influence mates and hang around these better people, everything will come right. The problem was I took all the trouble to the youth group. They were not, it wasn't going well, and they were organising a camp. They were doing this camp somewhere, I don't know where, and I paid to go, and I turned up with a bootload of beer. And you can imagine having someone like that in your youth group if you're a youth leader, and you're trying to sort them out and get rid of them. And I was just being rebellious and stupid and standing my ground and causing as much strife as I could, pulling down anyone I could into all the mischief that I got up to. And they had this guy come and share his story. So his name was Barry Good, and he was, I believe, a Baptist minister, and he'd spent a lot of time in Yatala prison in South Australia, and he claimed that God had leaded in his life in the prison, and that everything changed. He told me his story, and I was caught somewhere between this little child inside of me that was responding to what the school teacher was talking about with God being real, and this guy being a complete idiot,
Right.
like there's something mentally wrong with him. Like, how can you believe that? If you are stupid enough to believe that, don't make a big deal of it. Like, keep it to yourself. So I was really uncomfortable, and I just absolutely hated being in that big room with all these people. I was sitting right at the back. Inside, I'm sweating and freaking out. I'm just like not handling what I'm hearing. And after he was finished, he left and he went and all that stuff. And it was almost like I was able to re-engage normality again. But prior to that, I was just a wreck. So he said something in all the stuff that he said, if you find Jesus Christ, you'll know God. Now, he was putting this out to a very traditional faith-based youth group, which had the understanding that if you were sprinkled with water as a baby or christened, that you were a Christian, and everything about that was done. So there was no decisions to make. There was no accountability. There was no, I don't know what there was. I guess there's accountability because we have the 10 Commandments. I really didn't engage God or religion whatsoever. But suddenly I'm confronted with somebody who talks about it like it's real. And he dumps those words on me: if you find Jesus Christ, you'll know God. Well, the next 3 to 4 months, life spiraled out of control. I found that every person who I thought was a friend was only an acquaintance. I was living in a car. I was, couch surfing from place to place, trying to survive. I was just a complete wreck, and I got mixed up with some people that were really using me, and I just didn't want to live. I just absolute depression was kicking in like you wouldn't believe, and I always had a bit of trouble with depression. At primary school, my parents took me to see some sort of psychologist or something. They put me on some sort of medication and said that I had an overactive thyroid or something going on. I don't know what it was. Now, I was too young to understand all the details, but it just spiraled way out of control. So I'm driving my car between Strathalbyn and Mount Barker, and I had my foot on the throttle, and I am hoiking, absolutely hoiking. And I take my hands off the wheel, and I take my time to roll a cigarette deliberately, waiting for the end of everything, and I'm just taking my time, rolling away at the smoke. And I lit the smoke, put it in my mouth, and the car's still on the road. It was not a perfectly straight bit of road, and you can't do that on a perfectly straight bit of road either. You're gonna run off.
It is quite
So
a
it was a
windy road.
deliberate. What's that? Sorry,
It's
Sarah?
quite a windy road.
It is a windy road. You know that bit of road. So if you want to go a step further, you go between Wistow and Mount Barker. That's a windy road. So it was another night I was heading back that way because I was working up at Bridgewater, but I was heading back from Strathalbyn, and I'm coming into the corners. I'm absolutely exhausted, and I would be nodding off hitting the corners and coming into the corners. I'd hear the gravel, and it would wake me up in a shock, and I'd pull the steering wheel back onto the road, and I was just absolutely shocked, and then I made this decision that I don't want to go any further. I'm going to keep my eyes shut. I'm going to that's it. I'm going to die. So that's what I did. And then I woke up feeling cold. Several hours had gone by. The car was on the side of the road, and it was parked with the handbrake on and the headlights turned off. And in my mind, I'm going, well, I must have done that. But deep inside of me, there was absolutely no recollection of having done it. And I knew that, but I was in total denial. I was in denial. I must have done that. I must have pulled over and done that, was the only account that I could put to it. And then following that, another week later, I actually smashed the car. I come up over a hill in Spring Head, Mount Torrens area, ran up the back of another car, wrecked the front of it, spent the whole night just putting other panels on. I had a few of these things that I'd collected for a few $100 here and there, and got it going again. I went a whole night, no sleep, and then I went down to Strathalbyn to hang out with some acquaintances that I was determined I'd never go back to. But I did. I went back, hung out with them. It was Penny Farthing Day, 1986. And when everything was wound up, we just got in the car and we drove off down this dirt road somewhere between Strath and Victor Harbour. And we were just, they were just really crazy. They were on substance, a lot of alcohol involved, drugs involved, different things. I'd sort of hit the wall inside of myself where everything is wrong and I can't go any further with any of this stuff. It's like I'm looking for truth. I'm looking for real. I don't know where it is. I'm completely lost and completely damaged by everything I'm doing to myself and other people. And we're listening to this music It was
Steve,
AC/DC,
Steve, that's a
and we
great
had
place to pause because
yeah.
things don't sound good. But
No, they certainly don't. And if like it's bringing something up for you in your mind right now or in your life, Lifeline are always there, 13, 11, 14 to give a call as well. So we'll be back with more Life Bursts straight after this. Welcome back to Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah. Now, just before we went to the break, I did interrupt to give the Lifeline number, which is 13 11 14. If you need someone to chat to about anything that we're talking about today with Steve, because he is talking about some pretty heavy stuff that's happened in his life. He's being really honest. So thank you, Steve, for being so honest and sharing your life story with us and how it really was. Thank you.
yeah. So
You're welcome.
Steve, you got to this moment. You were with some mates. You were in the car. You had some AC/DC
DC.
going. So yeah, continue the story. Where did things go from there?
Well, we were miles away from any houses. We was out on some sort of a dirt road surrounded by paddocks, and we had that music cranking that much that the speakers were just about bouncing off the parcel shelf into the back window, and something in me is just absolutely despising everything that I do and everything that we do. So these mates, acquaintances, and really not mates, but they were just gone crazy. They'd gone crazy. They're starting to actually rip the hood lining out of the car. They're starting to damage things. It was almost like the music had somehow possessed their behavior, you know. And it was just gone. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't understand it. And I grabbed the cassette and I ripped it out of the player and I threw it. I just held it out in the middle of the paddock, and it was instant silence, for less than a second, until the explosion of reaction come from everyone else in the car. They just went off at me like I'd committed some sort of a crime that was unable to be resolved. And I grabbed hold of another tape, which was just in the car. It was Money for Nothing. It was a song I put in, and I just put it in, and it starts to build up this this guitar riff, and it really takes off. I just sort of put in the car into the tape, and I started to walk away from the car, and I probably only traveled maybe 100 or so meters, 200 meters, I don't know. And I'm disconnecting from everyone around me, and I don't know why, but I'm just standing there. And while I'm standing there, a decision, I don't even know if it was a decision from my mind, but I'd come to a place where enough is enough. I've got to turn. I've got to turn from where I am to where I need to go. And I really didn't believe in God. My mind could not accept him. I've been raised in a Christian school, but I embraced, evolution. I embraced everything that my mates are into, and the whole concept of God not being real was actually very safe in one sense for me, because if God's real, I'm accountable, because that's what I was taught, with church and stuff. But here I am standing there, and I pray, and I had no idea that I was going to do that. I must have been as surprised as God when I prayed. I mean, I don't know. It didn't come from my mind. It certainly didn't come from my emotions. My emotions were such a wreck. I had no tears. I hadn't had any tears for quite a period of time. It was like I'd become so hardened emotionally. But it was deep inside of me. And the Bible actually says that deep calls out to deep. And I guess that's what was happening. It was deeper than my emotions and deeper than my thoughts and my mind. And I don't even really know what I prayed. I really don't. But I know that deep inside, I was going, God, if you're real, and I know that this Barry good guy knows you, so I need to know you too. And I don't even know what I prayed, but it was, as I'm doing this, there's another guy that was in the car, and he got out and he had walked up next to me. His name was Gordon. We used to call him Buddha because he had a bit of a belt on him, and, something which I've got these days. And he stood next to me and he prayed out loud something very, very similar. And I never opened my mouth, but I felt this transforming love and power just come from wherever. I don't know where, and it just went so deep that it changed me. Now, it was a dark night. It was not bright, but it probably was, but it was cloud covered in. And it was very bright with moonlight above it, but it was like the air movement moved everything open. And the two of us are standing there, and I'm experiencing light that I'd never knew was available. It was like it wasn't physically able to be seen with my eyes, but it just flooded through me. And the same thing is happening to Gordo. The two of us are experiencing this encounter with God that we didn't know would have happened, could have happened, should have happened. We were just completely lost. And then all of a sudden, it's like we're found. We didn't know how. I didn't have an understanding really of the Bible. I felt washed and forgiven. I'd never, ever felt forgiveness, or I'd never felt clean. And it was such a transformation. And we went back to the car, and there's two young ladies there that we were doing all the wrong things with and hanging out with, and they exploded at us, really volatile. They were just so angry, and there was a bit of witchcraft involved. There's a bit of stuff, they were messing around with the occult, and there was things going on. So I guess it was a complete clash of two kingdoms, the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. And I never knew that these things existed, and all of a sudden I'm full on confronted with it. And these two girls that think that we're just lost it and gone crazy. So everything I thought about Barry Good, suddenly someone else is thinking about me. I'd change camps. I didn't even know that the other camp was there, and I'd change camps. I was flooded with love. I never. I drove away from that roadside experience, and I'm throwing alcohol out the window of the car, and drugs and pornography and all sorts of things. I came to a packet of cigarettes. I grabbed them. I put them in my top pocket. I said, "You're not getting them," But God is good, and He was able to weed my garden when it needed weeding. Now, I deliberately went separate directions from Gordon, because I thought, if he tells me this isn't real, I got nothing. I needed this so much. But it was another 18 months later, I met him again in the Mount Barker Uniting Church. They were doing a Life in the Spirit course, and there he was, and there I was. And we were just so blown away by finding each other again after this wilderness, crazy roadside adventure, miles away from any churches, any Christians, anything. And it was like, I don't know, we just opened our hearts to Him. I want to say that if you open your heart to God, He will not ignore you. It is just so, so real. Yeah.
Wow. So that was a defining moment. Something shifted in you, in your experience, your understanding. What shifted in the way that you lived life from that day on?
That's a good question.
It was a couple of weeks after this experience. One of the guys in the workplace, who's in spare parts, and he said to me, "What's happened to you? You're so different."
Right.
What has happened? And I didn't know what to tell him. I just said, I met God. And the guy just laughed his guts out, and he walked away. And I felt like a complete idiot. I didn't know what to. But I said, "What do you mean I'm different?" He said, "Well, the mongrel Steve is gone. You're like a different person." And I don't know. I felt like I was floating. I didn't understand any of it. The difficulty that was coming was I had no understanding of the gospel. I had no understanding of the Bible. So I tried reading it. I thought, well, I'm a Christian now. I've got to read the Bible. I open it up, and it probably said something about putting blood on the side of the altar. It must have been bang on in Leviticus somewhere. and I shut it again and goes, that's not for me.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to go to church, but I was terrified because of all the stuff I'd got up to, and I was told that if I ever showed up, I'd be, grilled and whatever.
So there was a
So
lot of
I
fear there, Steve. A lot of fear
huge
that
amount
you
of
had
fear. Yeah,
of going
yeah,
as well. So we'll hear more about that and the
yeah.
rest of Steve's story straight after this on Life Bus with Matt and Sarah. Welcome back to Life Bus with Matt and Sarah. Today we're chatting with Steve. Now, Steve, you've got up to the part of your story where you were a bit fearful of going into church because of the things that you'd done and the fear of being judged by other people. Is that what happened when you went to church?
All right. Well, I had no idea what I was doing. I decided that I'd try. The only church that I ever knew of was Springhead Lutheran Church. I didn't even know. I mean, I'd seen a building in the town that I think might have been Anglican or something. And as a little kid, I might have said, "Hey, Mum, there's a different church." And I think she said, "Oh, they don't believe what we believe," or something like that. So I just naturally thought, well, I got to go to this Lutheran church, and I was so terrified that I waited till everyone was in. I sat on the doorstep and I rolled a cigarette, and I just sat there. I'm wearing all my black clothes and my Rossi Ripple soles and just whatever. And the minister, he preached for 10 minutes every week, every Sunday, 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, he nailed exactly what was going on in my life. I don't know how he knew.
Hmm.
It was like, how can that happen?
Wow.
But I also found that I'd turn the radio on, and I didn't know there was such a thing as Christian music, but I'd hear secular songs that I'd heard 1,000 times. And whatever I was praying about, whatever I was talking to God about, would burst out of these lyrics, and it would hit me exactly what I needed to hear. Suddenly God was real. He was everywhere I was. Everything that I was thinking, he would deal with. I didn't know what to make of it. So I tried telling people about this relationship with God, and they thought I was a nut. There was people that said, we liked you better when you was on substance, like not that long ago, I had lunch with one of my aunties, and she said, when all that happened, your other two aunties said, well, he's really lost it now, like he's really lost it. And I just tried to navigate what was happening, and I didn't understand it. I couldn't engage anyone with it. It actually took me on a journey that went on about 4 months later, where I tried to go to another youth camp. I thought maybe I'll try that. And it was in Loxton in South Australia. They had a lot of youth groups there. It was a Lutheran thing. And every camp, every church group, youth group, had to put on some sort of a skit or something. And I think it was the Mount Barker Lutheran youth group, they put one on, and they had this massive silhouette scene on a stage, and all these people drinking and just not even engaging each other, really messed up. And there's like a drug party sort of thing. And guess what? They were playing that song "Money for Nothing" from Dire Straits. And they're playing this, and this build up in this riff in the music comes up to a real plateau thing, which was, for whatever reason, the time that I prayed and opened my heart to God, and he had invaded my life. So they're playing this, right?
Yeah.
And they've got this silhouette of all these people in drunkenness and darkness and whatever, and it gets that same riff in the music, and then they had this massive floodlight come on from the side of the stage, and everyone turned around and just stood there in the light. And I'm standing in the middle of this group of people. They were Lutheran, and they didn't really show religious emotion or anything like that. And I'm standing there wearing all my black clothes and my ripple soles, and whatever I am, I'm just bogan as bogan, and the tears are just flooding out of me. They're just hitting all over the floor. I just can't contain it any longer. God is just doing something. that I can't understand.
Mm.
This young lady come over. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Better than I've ever been in my life. I just got to talk to someone about this. I can't keep it in." And we sat around this bonfire until daylight. And she finally said, "I think you've been born again. Someone told me this is the sort of thing that happens when you're born again." And I thought, these are the only words that can possibly describe. In reality, it was like one life had finished and gone and a new one had come. And I couldn't go with it anywhere else. But I didn't engage people. I tried to. People would just laugh at me and tell me that I was crazy. I didn't really have around me people that understood what had happened. And as a result, the rejection, the pain, the stuff in my life took me on a really bad journey again. I found myself messing around with substance and a lot with alcohol and a lot of the things that have really taken a hold of my life revisited. And I ended up living in Echunga, and there was a workshop there that's opposite the pub, and I'm standing in that workshop with one foot each side of this pit, and I've just had enough, and I've got a gantry train around my neck, and I just want to end it all because I felt like God gave me a second chance, and I blew it, and I didn't understand that. I didn't understand the gospel. I thought that somehow God had given me a second chance, and it was all over now. I had no future in my own mind. I was just completely ruined, and I, I'm about to do something that I should never do, and I hope no one listening to this would ever attempt to do that. There's always Lifeline, please, you know. And while I'm standing there with this chain around my neck, I hear words, and they weren't my words, and they weren't audible, but they were very, very loud. They burst through into my person, and these words were, "You can't do this because you know me." And it was God speaking, and that was, in all honesty, the first time I really heard the voice of God, not just the right lyrics on the radio or it was like he just spoke. And I took the chain off, and I dropped myself into the bottom of the pit. I was angry, I was upset, and I thought, well, God doesn't want me, but he won't let me die. I couldn't understand what was happening. I was so wrecked by it all. Well, about a week later, there's this young guy comes and he wants me to look at a radiator for him, and he starts talking about Jesus. And I'm thinking, this guy knows what I know. Nobody else wants to know what I know, but this guy knows what I know. His name was Glenn Pitchford, and he was going to the Echunga Uniting Church, and he told me about the church, and he said, "Be good if you come." And I'm thinking, be good if I don't, you know. But it got the better of me because I thought God didn't want me. But if God doesn't want me, why would he send someone in there to talk to me? It didn't make sense. And I thought, well, I've got to do something. So I prayed and I said, God, even though you don't want me, I want you. So I'm going to go to church. And so I wandered in that building, and I sat myself on the back seat after everyone had started, and I thought no one will see me here. And I took off before they finished and got away with it for maybe 3 weeks. And then someone blocked the doorway and started a conversation with me. And I was terrified. I couldn't put a sentence together without the bad language hijacking my words, you know. And I thought, and I got through it anyhow. And someone invited me along to a Bible study group, and I couldn't read. I couldn't understand I couldn't understand the Bible. I couldn't understand word. I was dyslexic. So I could read a sentence, I get the full stop, I didn't know what happened. And these people, they knew every book and every chapter and every verse, and they could quote where they found it. And I felt like an inch tall amongst a forest of giants. And I didn't understand what was going on. But somewhere, somebody said, a few things that sort of made some sort of sense to me, and it caused me to ask a question. And I said, do you mean to tell me that when Jesus died on the cross, that he paid for my sin for the past and also for right now and for the entire future to the day that I die? And they said yes. And I was confronted with the best news that any person could ever hear. This is the best news ever. There's a guy that wrote out a check big enough to pay for anything, and he signed it in his own blood. And if you were dare to cash it in, it will transform everything for you.
Mm.
It
Yes,
will
it's
absolutely
very
transform
powerful,
everything.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Your story so far is so powerful, and I think we're only up to when you're quite young. It's been very powerful so far from where you've come to where you are now in the story with us. So we'll be back with more of Steve's story straight after this on Life Verse with Matt and Sarah. Welcome back to Life Verse with Matt and Sarah. Today we're chatting with Steve, and he's taken us on a roller coaster of a ride of different emotions and different things that have happened in his life that's only happened to him. But we're really aware that, you know, people listening and watching to this, wherever you are, might be going through similar things to do with suicide or depression, anxiety, fear, drugs or alcohol or abuse. And so, Steve, in the last few minutes of our show, I'd really love for you to share some type of practical advice for those people that are listening and watching from your experience and what helped you get through all of that.
Wow, this is going to be a bit of a marathon, but we'll have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah.
So, hey, look, I've been walking this walk for 37-ish years, and I've seen the faithfulness of God so many times. I just want to share with you one story about a guy called Hoppy. So I've written a book, and this is it here. It's called The Raw Edge of the Christian Experience. And Hoppy he features in one of the chapters where Aussie men can't cry, but Jesus men can. So Hoppy's, I met him at Goodna in Brisbane, or outside of Brisbane. I go into a Repco store and I'm picking up parts, and as I'm leaving, he makes his presence known to me. He gets up the side window of my car and he tells me there's a problem with his vehicle, and we get talking about it. And he, you know, I told him I think it was the fuel pump, and gave him a basic price. And then he goes, we talk motorcycles. He's Odin's Warriors member. He's got a vest on. I'm a member of Road Riders for Jesus. I'm in the van. I'm not in the leaders that day. But he spots something on the back of my van as he had approached, and it's the face of Jesus and two big hands that are stretched out with nails stuck through them, through the center of the hands. And it says a mechanic can fix most things, but he can fix it all. I had a sign writer put it on there. So Hoppy had seen that. We're talking motorcycles. We're talking all sorts of stuff. And he goes, "What, you Christian or something?" And I'm thinking, he's seen it. And I said, "Yeah, mate, what about you?" And he exploded. He go, "I got too much, blankety blank for that sort of crap, you know." And I said, "Well, I'll give you some advice, mate. Get yourself a white shirt and a tie. Go to as many church meetings as you can. Give all your money away to some preacher somewhere and read the Bible 50 hours a month and pray 50 hours a month and see if you can pay off $1 billion moral debt with 2 cents worth of hard trying. You're screwed, man. I'm screwed. Religion does nothing." But that bloke on the back of my van, he wrote out a check that's big enough to pay for anything, and he signed it in his own blood. And if you'd have the guts to cash it in, it will change everything. And he just looked at me and he goes, "You put that straight." He put a lot of colourful language into saying that as well. But listen, he got it. 2 hours later, I'm at his house. He's trying to wave me off the property. He's having a big argument with the woman. They're going for it like a couple of cats caught in a washing machine on a spin cycle. And he doesn't, and I just knew I had to be there a bit longer. So I called him out of the house. I said, "Mate, let's look at the car while I'm here." He said, "We're not going to fix it. We don't have the money." I said, "Mate, I don't care. Let's look at it. Let's get things underway. And if you want it done later, we'll sort it out." So I ended up at the backyard with him. And he's so wound up and so mad, and the dogs are going crazy, and he gets out of the house, and he's grabbed hold of the quarter panel on the back of the car, and he drops on his knees. He only had one leg, actually, one prosthetic leg he'd lost in a motorcycle accident. And he's howling his head off, and he says, every time I look at you, you frighten the hell out of me. What is happening? And I said, mate, it's not me, it's Jesus. He's not here to hurt you. He's here to fix you. And he's just freaking out. I talked to him about the violence. He said, I'm glad you're here. I would have killed her. And he was talking about the lady in the house. And he was determined that she wanted to die and that he should go to jail for it. So he thought that she was pushing her buttons to actually make everything go really far south. And they'd had a very violent relationship, and it was out of control. And I said, mate, you're not in charge, are you? The violence is in charge of you. And he told me that his parents had been really violent people. His grandfather had murdered someone. His great-grandfather had been murdered in a ship in Port Adelaide. There we go, Adelaide, Brisbane again. I don't know how all that works, but and I said, well, these things can go 3 or 4 generations. And he goes, well, that's it. I'm effing cursed, you know. He just completely lost it. I said, it's all right, mate. Jesus fixes this stuff. It's only a formality. And he's bawling his eyes out. He says, I can't even look at you. What the hell is going on? And I said, mate, Aussie men can't cry, but Jesus men can, and you're changing camps. This guy just stopped. I saw him open his heart to the Lord. I don't know what happened, but I laid hands on him and I commanded the spirit of violence to come out of him. He saw a big black thing come up and leave his body. I just saw his countenance change. And then he got up and he said, I've got to get upstairs and get the weapons out of the house. I said, well, that sounds like fun. Can I come with you? Darn sight more exciting than fixing cars, I can tell you right now.
Yeah.
He pulls out this 3-seater lounge and he's filling up 2 plastic buckets with hand weapons. And on the way up there, I said, can I talk to you, missus? Can I talk to your lady? Her name was Lisa. He told me her name. And it was the first time he looked kind of nervous when he mentioned her name. And I got in the house and I yelled out, hey, Lisa, love, can you come out? I need to talk to you. And she come out and she just looks at me and she looks straight past me and she sees Hoppy. They called him Hoppy because of his one leg. And she's just staring at him, can't keep her eyes off him. And he looked like a different man, but she is seeing a transformed human being. And I said, Lisa, love, I said, he's just taken Jesus Christ into his life. This stuff works. You need it. Are you in or out? And she goes, I'm in. And I thought, well, that was simple. So I wanted to pray with her. I just thought I'll just, so I put my hand on her shoulder and I said, can I pray with you? And I started to pray and her eyes rolled back into her head and all I could see was the whites of her eyes. The rest had sort of disappeared. She starts to fall backwards and I held her up and I said, hey, Hoppy, get over here and hold on to her. She's going to topple. And he drops his buckets of weapons. He comes flogging his way across the room and he gets his arm around her. And the two of them are there just bawling, tears all over the floor, just soaking into the old floorboards of the old Queenslander house. And God is all over him like a fat kid on a cupcake, I'm telling you. And I didn't know what to do with him. And I get this one word, marriage. Now, it just popped into my heart like, you know, and over a period of time, I guess I've come to really know when God's saying something. But in a circumstance like that, that's not the word you have. That's not the word you say. But things are just rolling along so fast. All I can do is just sprout it out of my mouth. And I said, are you two married? And they just shake their heads. I said, no. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't expect you would be. I don't know what I'm going to do now. And so I thought, well, this is awkward. I'll go downstairs and work on the car. And I said, listen, Hoppy, I'll go and work on the car and you work out how you're going to propose to this lovely lady. And 10 minutes later, he comes down the stairs, grabs me by my biceps, and shaking the daylight out of me, saying, she said yes. You know, it was going to be a murder scene. It was a dead set deal, and God intervened. And this has been the stories that I have seen so many times with people right through from drug addiction and outlaw bikers and people that are absolutely lost. But God comes. And if anyone, I want to tell you, the advice that I would give any listener here today is if you would dare have the guts to open your heart to Jesus Christ, he will turn up. He will not ignore you. He will not ignore you. When he was on the cross with his hands stretched out, nails through his hands, he was not ignoring you. He was thinking of you. Listening to this interview right now, listening to this life burst right now, he was thinking of you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much for sharing your story, your past, and to offer how you found a future. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, of course, Lifeline 13, 11, 14 is always there, as Steve mentioned as well during the interview. And it's Steve's story. So thank you, Steve, for sharing it with us today. And you can catch up with more of Life Bursts episodes on wherever you get your podcasts from community radio, television, and online through Facebook and YouTube. This is Life Bursts. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Matt. Thank you for joining us today.
Life Bursts is hosted by Matthew Karat and Sarah Freeman, with production by Reese Jarrett and Kay Hoshraw Ozadigan. For more episodes of Life Bursts, go to rawcut.com.au. This is a RawCut production.